Hey everyone, it's Lisa. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'm putting half square triangles on my LeMoyne Star block. These blocks were made with 2.5-inch strips. It's from a lovely collection, I think called Nature Study. I believe it was from Wilmington Prints, but I got it a long time ago at some terrific closeout at Hancock's. I didn't pay hardly anything for it. I love the material so much I figured I'd find something to do with it, and I did. One thing about 2.5-inch strips is that you can make with them a 9.5-inch LeMoyne Star, which is an odd size block, but if you're doing it like me and just putting it in the same setting, it really doesn't matter. And then when I set these on point, I'm taking an 8-inch square and I'm cutting it on one diagonal. When you set it on point, you have a 13.5-inch finished block. And I've mentioned to you before, when you have a more complex block like a LeMoyne Star, and frankly you can do it with anything, setting it on point gives you 40% more real estate. So you can size up your block in addition to creating a pleasing setting, because if you're using light and dark blocks, then you're going to have a basically a quarter square triangle in the middle where they meet, an hourglass, and I think that looks nice. And this sort of setting really allows your fabrics as well as your block to shine. I think this is a really nice framing of a LeMoyne Star. And you might think futzing around with glue basting is not worth the time. I think it is, just largely because I never have to pick out stitches. And that's not to say that from time to time I don't have to pull off something that's been glued, but I don't have to pick out stitches, because when it's under the needle of your machine, it doesn't move. And the nice thing is you can sit, you can watch TV, and you can stage your work. Like for example, I'm putting all of my blocks to the left of my machine, and it will just take me so little time sewing, and I can sew at full speed. It's just easy to do. I'm using my Teflon sheets, which I like quite a bit. They get very hot, so one thing about them, they retain heat. So when you're pressing with them, I don't think there's anything better than using them as your pressing sheets. And I have one underneath here, even though I have a protective cover over top of my beautiful linen covered board that quickly got scorched and starched. Anytime you're working with starch, you're going to mess things. You're going to mess up your surface. And those starch particles will stay, and they can get, when your iron's really hot, they can scorch the fabric it's attached to as well as your iron. So I have my cotton duck, I think it was a curtain, I don't even know, maybe it was a tablecloth, I have no idea what it was. I got it at a thrift store. I bought 2 of them, so I figured somebody had been using them as a curtain. And the nice thing about it is they're perfect. They're washable. Once I get them on my ironing surface, they just stay put. They don't shift. And then when they get dirty, I just pick them up and put them in the wash and then start all over again. But these make a good surface for when I'm doing something messy like gluing. And then I've mentioned to you before that I cut them to make individual pressing sheets. And again, because they get so hot, they retain heat. So I think that's why they are superior to just putting your iron on your fabric. And if you watched my LeMoyne Star block series, these pressing sheets allow you to cut your LeMoyne Stars and put them together and press them, and you can press as you work, and I think it makes for an accurate block, and you don't have to worry about having your bias stretch on you, because the pressing mat, once it's down, nothing moves underneath it, so there is not going to be any drag on your fabric that will cause your bias to stretch. And you can, this is all bias here, and you can see there's nothing stretched. And the nice thing about the glue is it does hold the hot bias in place. And that's another really good thing about glue basting. I use this method too when I'm making diamond rectangles and 8 at a time or 4 at a time flying geese. Wouldn't it be nice to have 8 at a time? But the glue just keeps things put, and you are able to stage your work. So you can piece things together. You know, in this particular example, we are doing 2 sides of our block. We will stitch them, set our seam, iron our seam, press it over, not open. I don't press my seams open. And then sew the other side on. When these triangles are oversized on purpose, and I do recommend you have a proper square up block. The largest one I had was 13.5 inches, and when I wanted to square this, which is 14 inches, it really didn't fit any of the rulers that I had, and it really does help a great deal to have the right square up ruler rather than trying to trim one side then another, because sometimes you have to distribute. And if you don't have a big enough square up ruler, you don't know how to distribute it because you can't see the whole thing. So I got a 16.5 inch creative grids. They had a 20, but frankly, I don't make 20-inch blocks. And it came yesterday, and I was so glad that I got it. And it wasn't too bad. It was $30, I think. Maybe $35. Which is not a little bit of money, but considering I saved more than that much on my fabric purchase for this quilt, my super closeout, super discounted stuff. See, that's why I buy closeout. I would rather figure out what to make with beautiful fabric that I bought at a great price, and then buy fun gadgets to ease my work as I piece or cut or whatever. So I do believe in having the right rulers and tools, but let's face it, excuse me, it can get expensive. I've been enjoying my Juki. I had moved to my Bernina to do something different. I have to say I like piecing on my Bernina better than the Juki. And I know that part of that is just because I like the gated foot on my Bernina. And it has the best gated foot of anybody out there. I don't know what Pfaff and Husqvarna have, but the Juki foot's crap. And I'm sorry for it. And you just can't even buy a higher quality foot for it, which is a shame. So this goes by very quickly. It's so little time to get bigger blocks. And again, even though the block size is 9.5 finished, they're all 9.5 inch finished. So you don't have to worry about any weirdness. I'm looking at this and I'm wondering if I've even trimmed it. Hold on. Yeah, I trimmed it. What made me ask the question, as you can see, that's a little that's a little weird there. My metal tip fell down into my glue bottle, so I've got a little fatter bead than I typically use. One thing with glue basting too, you need to make sure that you stay in the seam. And if you have too much of a glob, it will spread on you. So using a precision tip and a light hand is a good thing. Because if it's outside your seam, it works so effectively that it'll pinch it, and it's so flat you won't realize it. So just make sure you pop the glue out and make sure things measure the way you expect them to. And once you get your muscle memory down, you're always going to be within the seam. But given that I had that big glob, I thought that I would give a cautionary tale on that. So this is part of my Swedish death quilting. Excuse my reach. My Swedish death quilting. I've got these blocks. I don't want to die and have somebody trying to figure out what to do with them. Now I will say the nice thing about having this, the metal tip out, and this is a fine enough hole, is you don't have to squeeze the bottle so hard. And as you get older, if you're a younger quilter, you won't notice it so much, but as you get older, repetitive stuff, and there's a lot of repetition in quilting, but repetitive stuff starts to wear on you. And I do a lot of computer work, have my whole life. If I didn't have a computer, I couldn't earn a living. But, so I have a lot of some stuff in my wrist and all. That gets a little irritated at times. But the other thing is, on my iron, I was using a vintage iron, which I liked very much. It was very heavy. You can see the spread on me. It was very heavy, and I didn't, ended up with upper shoulder pain. I mean bad pain, bad enough where I couldn't sleep at night. So I determined that it was probably my, iron. So I have another vintage iron, which is this very I paid $3 for it at the thrift store. It's a Proctor Silex. But what's cool about it, it's got an aluminum sole plate, so that means that it's not going to rust. At least I haven't seen any. So I do have steam in it, and it doesn't turn off, which is both good and bad. It's good because, you know, you don't have to keep, you know, the other repetitive movement is doing that with your iron, so that you can get it to go. I need to cut some more blocks and I'll be back. Okay, getting to the home stretch here. The other thing I meant to mention is that when you cut your diagonals, just trim your ends a little bit too. That just helps you with some of the excess when you sew these together and you've got overhang. Again, it's when we oversize, you're going to have overhang. I was commenting, somebody was doing a paper piecing and they were using their method, which is fine. But she was saying, oversize your pieces by an inch more than you would need. And I mentioned that I had good luck with oversizing basically a half an inch, but in doing that, I always had to trim the seam after the fold, after the first piece, to make sure it was a 1/4 inch, which makes sense because if it's wider and you're lining up an edge, then you're going to run out of space because of you're not going to have enough material. So it's just common sense. And she really got in a bind over it, and I don't think she really understood what I was saying. And frankly, and I'm not saying there was anything wrong with her method at all, but I have seen methods that people demonstrate that really are kind of they don't make sense. And so that's why you have to be careful no matter, and I'll say that for anything that I'm doing with you too. You have to test. If you're interested in a technique, like for example, I was interested in the LeMoyne Star technique. I watched every single video. That's like, and if I'm making a special recipe, I will do the same thing. Or a special cooking technique. Excuse my sniffling, my allergies are killing me. But I will watch the techniques that people are using so that I understand the range of stuff, So I did the same thing with, foundation paper piecing. And I don't do English paper piecing, and I'm confident that I never will. I don't find that an enjoyable thing. But some of the stuff that's out there, it's just not it's so wasteful, and it's not reasoned or thinking. People are just working from a giant scrap pile and not bothering to pre-cut anything, and that's really hard when you're paper piecing, to have such oversized pieces. And I think that contributes to a lot of people struggling with it. I think if you make templates and make your oversized templates and then cut your fabric accordingly, you'll have less waste and it'll make more sense to you. I was watching somebody demonstrate a Quilt Works, and those people have it down to a frickin' science. I haven't made any of those patterns. They're really quite lovely. I can probably do it now, probably at the level that I would understand it now, but I'm starting my 4th year quilting. I made my first baby quilt probably exactly 3 years ago. And I have to say, I've really enjoyed my quilt journey. I've never really had much time for hobbies, being a mom and a professional woman. So it's basically just work and family, not really too much me time. And I don't say that in a complaining way. I did sew a little bit, but not in a concerted way like I think quilting allows you to do. Making a quilt is a real investment in time over a period of time versus, like, if you're making a set of curtains, it's you know, fairly straightforward. You know, cut your fabric, line it, hem it. Not to say that it doesn't take time. I think the hardest thing about curtains are to do it well, particularly when you have patterns in the fabric and the repeat, is really just getting that stuff lined up perfectly. You don't have to do so, you have to line up pieces perfectly in quilting, but not quilt pattern, not fabric so much, unless of course you are doing one block wonders, which really are a lot of fun. But and I know that I see some people on One Block Wonders, they really have done some extraordinary things with it. And I've done one, and I really liked it quite a bit. And I also like the posy blocks, which instead of using 8 layers of fabric, use just 4, and that creates some pretty designs. All right, I need to sew these up. Okay, I'm going to tell you, let's see what we have. Okay, I have 21 blocks. So I've got to sew both sides of these, 21 blocks, and it is basically 726. Let's see how long it takes me to sew both sides of these. Before I get going, what I want to suggest to you is when you have a block such as this and you have a lot of seams on the back, sew it with the smooth side down, and that way you'll ensure that you don't end up with weird stuff happening on the back and having to pick out seams for that. Okay, it took me 22 minutes to sew onto 2 sides of this to my blocks. So that was, you know, basically a minute for each block. So let me just clip all of these. Now, I do want to caution you when you are, you know, doing speed sewing, you need to check from time to time to make sure your bobbin thread hasn't run out. Not that that happened to me this time, but it has happened to me before. And I'm going to tell you, I have a little fess up. Wasn't very straight on some of my gluing. So I had to kind of reposition slightly a couple of things. And they were just on one side of the block, so I must have just gotten lazy or not paying attention because I was chatting with you. But anyway, this is a quick way to do it. So what we want to do now, I want to show you a couple of things and not bore you too much longer. And let me just go ahead and show it to you now. And ring off. So we're going to always set our seam so it lies flat. You can see that's a little puckered, but as soon as we hit it with our iron, it's going to be flat. And then we're going to open it up. And this is probably a good time to use some steam. And this is what I want to show you. You want to clip these for when you come. You don't have to if you've got a gated foot that'll go over it. But it's a good idea to clip them if you haven't. And I had clipped them a little bit anyway, but not so much that helped with all the overhang. And the other thing I'll point out is I am not trying to get, my block is my block, so it's finishing at 9.5 inches. So I am not trying to make these points, or my overall block is not going to be the right size. And I am perfectly happy with my LeMoyne Star, you know, having that little bit of overhang. So if, you know, you're more careful than that, and a better quilter than that on LeMoyne Star is good for you. I applaud you, but I am not. And as I've said before, you have to accept and quilt within your current quilting skill, and this is my current quilting skill for these blocks. And I do them a little better now, but for these, which were, I think, a few months ago before I had perfected some of my techniques, that's where they're finishing at, and I am totally fine with that. So anyway, thanks for joining me. I don't really have anything new to show you, other than that this is a good way to get your blocks 40% bigger and showcase your more complicated blocks in between. Hope you have a great day and working on projects that bring you joy. Bye.